Hello and welcome to The Drug Trip. This channel is here to feed the curiosity of those who would like to gain an insight to the effects of various drugs and substances through user experiences and stories, with our main goal being to entertain and reduce harm and abuse. We post regular trip reports every few days, so if you do enjoy these, we would really appreciate it if you subscribed. And more importantly, we love to hear our viewers' thoughts, opinions and experiences, so please leave something for us in the comment section and we may use it in a future video. Enjoy and be safe. It was Friday night. I had just managed to obtain 10 hits of blotter, and this was the first time I would be trying LSD. I was very excited at the time and could not wait to try it. I had done extensive research beforehand, and on this particular Friday night, I really thought I was ready to escape reality. Little did I know was what I was in store for later on that evening. So the night progressed, and I invited a few friends over to my house. For the purpose of this story, we're going to call these people Jack, Kate, Tim and Ben. Kate had also done a bit of research and was ready to try it as well. It was just going to be me and her doing the trip, while everyone else was just going to hang out and trip sit us, just to make sure everything stayed under control. So the time came when we were ready to try it. I handed her her blotter and I took my own, and we both popped them in our mouths. We then decided to go and watch TV, just while we waited for it to kick in. It seemed to take an eternity. After around 2 hours, I called a friend of mine and asked him what the deal was. He insisted I just keep waiting, so I did. About 10 minutes later, Kate claimed she could feel it. However, I could not. About 50 minutes later, I did begin to feel it. It came on slowly. My thoughts seemed to wander wherever I would let them go. Everything I touched had a very interesting feeling to it. Some things were rather uncomfortable to touch. I picked up Ben's keychain and stared at it in amazement at all the colours. Then it started feeling really odd, like it was cutting into my skin. I put the keychain back down. While Kate was already tripping hard and had went into another room, I really wasn't quite all the way there yet. I went to see what she was up to, and she kept going on about snakes for the next half an hour, and how the room was filled with snakes and the snake gods. At this point, I was enjoying myself and having a really good time, just laughing about everything. The smallest things seemed hilarious, and for the next few minutes, I was just fucking around with Kate while she was going on and on about snakes. I kept unplugging her laptop cord, which for some reason was hilarious at the time. I was really enjoying myself. I just felt like fucking around with everyone. I was there on the ground, screaming and yelling, "Ben, Ben." Then he would come into the room, and I would go completely silent. Then he would walk back into the living room, where the other trip sitters were, and I'd scream and yell his name again. This went on for around 3 or 4 more times, until he finally just got sick of my shit and started ignoring me. I had some really crazy visuals, the most noticeable being when I looked at people's faces. While watching someone talking, their face would kind of morph, get larger and smaller. Their expression would constantly change. I found this quite amusing. At this point, both of us were tripping quite hard and nearing the peak. We were both laying on the ground and having such a good time. At this point, one of my trip sitters decided that he had to try it after watching how much fun we were having. I kept telling him no, but he didn't listen. He went to the kitchen and grabbed a hit. He threw the money for it later. A bit later, I actually found out that every person in my house had done the exact same thing. They all wanted to try it, so they took a hit without my approval. At this point, I started panicking. They were treating the drug as if it was something small like weed or alcohol. Tim even claimed it was no big deal, and it's just a drug to chill out with your friends with. Oh, how wrong he was. At this point, I was freaking out, because absolutely everybody had assured me that there was no trip sitter available because everyone had taken a tab. My friend Tim tried to calm me down. It worked for a little bit. We went up to the pool deck outside my house, lied down, and we were reminiscing about a classic scene in The Pirates of the Silicon Valley, where Steve Jobs takes LSD. We discussed it for a while and talked about how amazing it was that all those computers were made. This doesn't make any sense to me as I'm telling you this now, but at the time, we all thought it made perfect sense. The pool deck had an amazing, unique feel to it, as did anything else I touched, and my vision was filled with colours. I finally started to enjoy myself for a little while, but it was short-lived. Kate and Ben had run off, and everyone was being really loud outside in the garden. I started worrying again. A bit later, I felt too cold outside, so we all eventually made our way back indoors. It wasn't but a minute later that the doorbell rang. Tim went outside and answered the door. It was the cops. They wanted to talk to me since it was me that lived here. I was panicking again. I went outside to speak with the officer. He told me that they had gotten a welfare check call. I kept trying to convince the officer that everything was fine and that no one had done anything. I also kept saying that I did not want any of them inside my house under any circumstances. I couldn't think straight at the time, as I was at the peak of my trip. I just kept repeating what I was saying, that I didn't want them inside my house. The officer kind of gave up on me for a while another officer came out to talk to me. This officer tried to talk to me as much as he could on a personal level. He said how he knew we were on something and that his guess that it was acid. I didn't say yes or no, but my facial expression did change when I realised he knew what was up. He continued talking to me and started going on about how he used to sell dope at my age. Then he started talking about how he turned his life around and that I needed to do the same. At this point, the other officer came back outside and started questioning me again. I felt so intimidated and scared. I was tripping hard and I could not handle the situation at all. I felt like I was 2 inches tall and the officers were giants, as if I was a small bug, a second away from being squashed. They also questioned my friends in a different part of the house. My friend had just told them that I sold the LSD to them. I tried to weasel my way out of it, but I was tripping so hard I just couldn't handle it. I don't remember a whole lot of what happened next, but the officers had entered my house and they found the remaining 5 hits of blotter, which I had left in a DVD case on the kitchen counter. I felt destroyed. I knew in my mind that this was the end. At this point, they had called an ambulance to my house, as well as backup police officers. My entire cul-de-sac was filled with law enforcement. Since I was freaking out even more now, the police officer led me over to the ambulance so that the medical examiner could check me out. He said I would be fine and that I just had a really high pulse. Some of the police officers were actually enjoying themselves and fucking around with me. I remember one officer telling me to go to another officer. Then when I got there, that officer would say, "What are you doing here? I told you to go over there." One of the officers who was talking to my friends inside of the house was eventually talking about all the crazy things that all my friends were saying and how they were definitely gone. Eventually, one of the officers led me back to my front porch to help me get my shoes. I put them on and then I was placed inside the back of a police car. I felt 2 inches tall again and began to feel very claustrophobic and started freaking out. I kept looking out of the window and eventually they let me out again, just for a little while. They asked me a few more questions. Then I asked if I could call my parents. At this point, the reality had really struck me. I knew how fucked I was. I knew I was being arrested and I knew that there was nothing I could do to get out of this. I called my father, crying to him on the phone and telling him how sorry I was for disappointing him. I went on about how I should have listened to him. After a while, the police officer told me to wrap it up, so I said my goodbyes and he took my phone as evidence. I was put back into the police car and an officer got in and started the car and we drove to the police station. We got to the police station. I was led inside. I was still tripping and had trouble remembering what he was telling me to do. He led me down a hallway and had me sign some papers. Then I was placed into a small holding cell. Once I was in the cell, I realised the severity of the situation again. The cell was a small room with bright lights, a mirror, a toilet and a sink. I sat on the bench inside the cell and just thought about everything, wondering how I got myself into this situation. I started crying and asking myself out loud, how could I do this? How could this happen? This talking to myself probably went on for at least an hour. Then I proceeded to stare at the floor, which caused me to see some very interesting visuals. I couldn't enjoy them though. My mind was not in the right place. At this point, I just wanted the trip to end. I took a drink of water. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked terrible. I definitely looked like someone who was fucked up on some sort of drugs. I had this weird thought, is this me? Is this who I am? I kept thinking this for the next hour. I kept drinking water to help end my trip faster, and I also went to the restroom a few times. Finally, an officer opened the cell and I was led out. I was told I would be going to a local juvenile detention centre. My heart sunk, and again I realised just how much shit I had gotten myself into. I was put into handcuffs, then I was led outside by 2 officers and placed into a van. At this point, it was around 5 AM. I had not slept, but I couldn't sleep because I was still tripping. Anyway, I was in the back of the van and the officers began to drive. The detention centre was around 2 hours away, so they told me to try and get some sleep. I tried, but I couldn't. It was very uncomfortable sitting with handcuffs. During the 2-hour drive, I had some very weird thoughts. I thought a lot about life and how those officers were just normal people who happened to have a job in law enforcement, and how they all had their own families and their own problems. This was just their job. My mind wandered the entire ride there. Eventually we got there. I was taken out of the vehicle and led to a door outside the facility. A very buff man was standing there. The officers wished me luck and left me with this man, who then proceeded to yell at me like a drill sergeant. He made me repeat everything he said and started going over some ground rules of the facility. There was a yellow line taped down on the floor, and I had to acknowledge all the officers and request permission to cross it. This was very hard to do at the time, as I was still kind of fucked up, and I really hadn't slept at all. Eventually, one of the guards led me into a room, had me shower, gave me some prison clothes to change into, and that was that. I couldn't believe I was actually in jail. After my shower, I was allowed to call my parents. I asked them to get me a lawyer and they agreed. That was the last I would hear from them. And eventually I was led to a room with bunks with the other inmates. The next 3 days that I would remain in this facility would be the worst days of my life. The first day was the worst. I was still coming down from the LSD, and I was not allowed to sleep at all until 10 PM rolled around. Needless to say, I could hardly function during the day and was completely exhausted by the time night time came. The facility operated just like a standard jail. Asshole guards, terrible food, no rights, and nothing to do besides read the rule sheet that you were given. If you behaved, you could later be upgraded and then you were able to read a Bible. Then if you continued to behave even further, you could then read a book. 3 days I remained in this facility, and they were the longest days of my life. What was even worse is that all the other kids were in there for real crimes like fighting, stealing, assault, etc. I was in there for a drug charge, a victimless crime, I told myself. Every night before I went to sleep, I would think about how I was going to possibly get out of here, and how long I would be in here. On the 3rd day, I was taken to court in a white van, alongside a dozen other inmates who were scheduled for court that day. We got to the courthouse. My case happened to be the very first one. My parents, my lawyer and I both went to the stand. My lawyer did most of the talking, and eventually it was agreed upon that I should get out of juvenile detention, but have house arrest for a month, and then 8 more months of probation. I was unhandcuffed and released to my parents. This is where the story ends. All of this happened over 1 hit of LSD. My trip was a train wreck, a complete disaster. I later found out that all of my friends had gotten off scot-free, not charged with anything. I was slapped with over $1,000 of fees, and now I had to serve probation. So this is where my story ends. I wasn't able to properly evaluate the drug due to everything that happened. Would I ever try LSD again? I'm not really sure at this point, but if I did try it, it definitely wouldn't be at my house again.